Good morning, good early afternoon, and good evening to me. I'm live from Barcelona, and I thank you very much that it's already fourth time during February that you find the moment to spend this hour with us, and that we can continue speaking about Jews and diaspora. And today we plan to finish our talk about the phenomenon of Soviet Jews. And I remind you that we began at the end of the 19th century, of the pre-revolutionary times, speaking about the suppression of Jews in Russian Empire, and then speaking about the participation of Russian Jews in the revolution. Then we witnessed the success, the tremendous success of Jews in early Soviet Union in 1920s and 1930s, when Jews occupied incredible position in the Soviet elite, speaking about political, scientific, artistic, social life. We also spoke about the years of Great Terror. We spoke about the years of the Second World War, the trauma of Holocaust, the Jews serving in the Soviet army, and then we witnessed the dramatic period of the post-Second World War time in Soviet Union, when Jews, on one hand, so many Jews lost their families and figured out that ideal of Soviet reality with the supposedly existing friendship among the nations did not work, and the neighbors were willing to murder Jews. And at the same time, Jews faced that anti-Semitic myth that they did not fight on the front, but instead spent the wartime in Tashkent in the evacuation. And we also discussed so-called dark years of Soviet Jewry, starting from 1948, basically from the creation of the State of Israel, when Jews lost their privileged position, when Jews faced state anti-Semitism, organized state anti-Semitism, with targeting Jewish scholars, targeting Jewish musicians, composers, translators, writers. We spoke about the trial of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee and the destruction of it, the murder of the Jewish Yiddish poets and writers, and about the doctor's plot. So now we are ready to continue. And let me share my screen, and here we go. So 1953, finally, all right, Stalin is dead. We've done with that. And the political climate in the USSR with the death of Stalin changed dramatically and quite rapidly. The time of the worst repressions, the time of the worst executions, the mass repressions, was by then over. And for example, those doctors who were imprisoned according to the doctor's trial, they were all released, as well as millions of other political prisoners in the Soviet Union. And I would like to mention here one thing that I'm not sure you're well aware of. The first repatriation of people from Soviet Union abroad. See, Soviet Union, it was supposed to be the best country on our planet. So the idea that any Soviet citizen was willing to leave Soviet Union was considered a crime. You cannot possibly want to leave the best country on earth. So whoever was willing to leave Soviet Union was considered to be an enemy, a traitor, and potentially the foreign spy, to be imprisoned and in Stalin times executed pretty fast. Now, here we have two waves of repatriations from the USSR. First wave, it was 1944, 1946. So at the end of the Second World War, there was an agreement between Soviet Union and the communist government of Poland. According to that agreement, those people who still had Polish passports, who still were Polish citizens, if they were either Poles by ethnicity or Jews by ethnicity, they were allowed to leave Soviet Union and go back to their motherland. According to that agreement, about 175,000 people, Polish citizens, left Soviet Union. Primarily, they were Polish Jews who fled to the east, who fled eastward, who crossed the border with Soviet Union, running away from the Nazis. And this way they survived the war. There was also a group of Hasidic Jews, of religious Jews, who heard of this opportunity and who organized the underground production of the fake documents. On the photograph on the right, this old man, his name is Beryl Dubrovsky. He was the member he was the member of that network. He remembers his father and his grandfather participating in the distribution of the fake Polish documents among the religious Jews who understood that had nothing to do with Soviet Union and who were willing to leave. And his grandfather was one of the Jewish men who were arrested. Because they had fake documents. So this is an interesting moment because it's first time in Soviet history that some people out of a sudden were let go. Second wave of the same story, it's 10 years later, 1956-59, already under Khrushchev, and another agreement between Soviet Union and Poland. Those still Polish citizens who were not ready to leave in 1946, who were imprisoned by then, who were far away in Central Asia, in Gulag, anywhere else. Now they have this window, window in time, and they could leave. So we have about 30,000 more. And again, we have former Polish Jews leaving Soviet Union. Very often we don't speak about that. It's not a very well known story. That's why I wanted to draw your attention that the immigration, the exodus of Soviet Jews actually began already right after the Second World War. If you are willing to go deeper into the story of Polish Jews who survived the war, the Second World War, on the territory of Soviet Union, these are two books to look for: Polish Jews in the Soviet Union and Polish Jewish refugees in the wartime Soviet Union. It's not famous story, it's not much discussed story, so I'm encouraging you to dive deeper and read and learn more about that. And if there is any request for that, we will have a special talk dedicated specifically to the story of Polish Jews in the wartime Soviet Union. There is another book that I would like to mention. It's called Revolution, Repression, and Revival, The Soviet Jewish Experience. A very good book that speaks about the phenomenon and the experience of Soviet Jewry, kind of giving you more of a, again, this general picture. So by 1953, we understand that we have Soviet Jews who have experienced two big traumas. One trauma, it's a trauma of Holocaust, right? It's the crimes committed by the neighbors who before the war praised communism, the ideas of multinational friendship, who were drinking vodka together and eating together and working together and being the members of the Communist Party together. Now, out of a sudden, they became the enemies. And then second, the Soviet government anti-Semitic campaigns that we discussed the last time. So and these anti-Semitic campaigns, they targeted Jews specifically. But after the death of Stalin, Jews were never rehabilitated as an ethnic group. See, Stalin used to persecute specific ethnic groups. Like there were whole ethnic groups like Chechens, like Tatars, like Volga Germans that were persecuted as a group. They were deported from their historical lands. They were sent to far east or north in Siberia. These people were able to come back and rehabilitated as a group. Jews never received that. So, if prior to the Second World War, anti Semitism was not tolerated by the state, then after the war, it became the essential part of the state politics and people's attitude. The seeds were sowed by the Nazi propaganda and post Second War anti Semitic campaigns. So, if before the war being anti Semite was inappropriate, then after the war, it became normal. Yes, of course. Yes, Jews are bad. It's just obvious. Look at this conversation between Khrushchev, the future head of Soviet Union, with a Polish Jew. Her name was Maria Khmelnytskaya. She worked in Kiev in the government, and she lost her documents during the war. She was a communist. She was a member of a communist party. And one day it became clear that she was Jewish. And then Khrushchev explained her that she had to leave, that she could not work and stay in Kiev in Ukrainian government. He told her, but we are objective. Jews in the past committed many sins against the Ukrainian people. I wonder what sins he referred to. The people hated them for this. Here in Ukraine, we do not need Jews. And I think that for Ukrainian Jews who survived Hitler's attempts to exterminate them, it would be better not to return here. It would be better for them to go to Birobidzhan. Remember, we spoke about it. After all, this is Ukraine. Do you understand? This is Ukraine. And we're not interested in the Ukrainian people interpreting the return of Soviet power as the return of Jews. This is post-Second War attitude of the Soviet government towards Jews. Mordechai Altshuler, the incredible scholar who researched and published amazing books about the Soviet Jews, he he speaks about Soviet Jewry in a post-Second World War period as the vanishing giant. Like it was a giant ethnic group of 2.5 million people, and the Jews who faced great peak success prior to the war. And then after the war, Jews continued to be the most educated, the most professional ethnic group in the USSR. Their number was declining because there was very low birth rate among Jews in Soviet Union. I mean, 2 children were maximum and very high intermarriage rates. Yiddish language, religious traditions were completely replaced with the Russian culture, secular identity. If, their great parents were Jews because they went to shul and because they knew Shema Israel, now Soviet post-Second World War Jews were Jews because they read Dostoevsky and were fascinated by the Russian culture. The glass ceiling. So, despite their talents, now post-Second World War reality is that Jews were blocked from the most desirable roles, from the political, from diplomatic job, from the high positions in the army, from high positions in the police. So the most desirable jobs now were not available. So by 1961, there was just one Jew in the state government. Remember, we started with having half of the state government being Jewish. In the local governments, there were no Jews on so-called intellectual positions, like in charge of the ideology, in charge of the education, in charge of the science. We see Jews in local governments in charge of like economical things, economy, local economy, but not in charge of any intellectual things. So being Jewish became like what's in your passport. what ethnicity is mentioned in your documents rather than how you live your daily life. So Mordechai Schuller says the Jews were it was a giant in terms of the talent and intellect, but vanishing because of the assimilation and the lack of growth uh, in a Jewish way and in intellectual way. In the middle of at the end of the 50s, 1959, according to the state census, nearly 500,000 Jews mentioned Jewish language as mother tongue. It includes not only Yiddish, but for example, Jewry that was spoken by Georgian Jews, Jews in Azerbaijan, Jews in other areas of Caucasus. So, 1959, the Soviet government decided to organize something for Jews, something cultural. So they chose one writer, Shalom Aleichem, because he wrote about poor people. So he was socialist in essence. And they organized a celebration of his Jubilee, 100-year Jubilee of Shalom Aleichem. They published his books in Yiddish. That what you have on the screen. They published his books in Yiddish. They published Shalom Aleichem books translated into Russian, and they established the Yiddish magazine Sovietische Gameland. We have it on the screen, and on the right, that's editorial board in Moscow, Moscow Jews, members of this editorial board of Sovietische Gameland. It's Soviet Jewish magazine in Yiddish. Much of it was sent abroad to Poland and to several other countries, but it did play certain small but important role in the Jewish culture in Soviet Union. In general, in late 1950s, Soviet government decided, but Jews also, quite like other ethnic groups in Soviet Union, can have their own entertainment, so that professional theaters no, but Jews were led to open Yiddish non-professional theaters and musical groups. They were organized in many different cities of Soviet Union, even in Moscow, and then they were able to travel around the country and perform. This is non-professional theater. So it's like non-professional sports teams. So it's something small. It doesn't receive state funding, but still they can function. And in every republic, it was different. Like in one place, like in Moldova, Jewish theater was allowed to stage, for example, the Diary of Anne Frank, while in the other part of Soviet Union, another Jewish theater was not allowed to do so. So it was still at least something, and these theaters, they were very successful, especially in the smaller towns. Jews loved them, and the audiences were always full. A very important event, 1957, the Festival of Youth and Students in Moscow. Who we see on the screen? We see the Israeli delegation that constituted of Jews and Arabs, and also members of the trade unions. That's Jewish delegation performing right on the train station, Jewish delegation passing through Moscow. For Soviet Jews, it was absolutely unique moment because they saw Israelis like in real life. I mean, I would like to see. I was born in Soviet Union. Up until the fall of Soviet Union of 1991, we were not allowed to travel abroad very much. There was no option to go get, I don't know, Australian visa, get on the plane and go to Australia. Australia was like moon. You cannot go to the moon and you cannot go to Australia. It's the same. So you don't know if it exists or not. It's illusion. You have no chance. You can't even dream of going there. So the same with Israel. the Soviet Jews, it was just an eye-opening thing. Oh, Israelis exist. They are alive. And so whoever of the Soviet Jews had sentiments towards Israel, those sentiments, of course, became stronger after seeing this beautiful, handsome Jewish man, beautiful Jewish women, beautiful Jewish youth coming to Moscow. Official synagogues and underground Jewish religious movement. As I mentioned already, all along Soviet Union, there was limited number of synagogues that were officially open, like Moscow synagogue, like the synagogue in Leningrad, like one synagogue in Kiev, and several more. So they were synagogues where anybody could go. All these synagogues were overlooked by the KGB. Moscow rabbi was appointed by KGB, and he had to coordinate everything he did with KGB. No questions about that. Parallel to it, there was ongoing underground Jewish religious movement, also non-stop in Soviet Union, in the bigger cities and the smaller towns. The only exception is Georgia, partly as Georgia, Azerbaijan, and partly Uzbekistan. There in Caucasus and Central Asia, there was no problem with religion. And look at this photograph, it's 1958. You see Jews in the synagogue in Gori in Georgia. You see old man, middle-aged man, and a child. It means there's no problem with religion if you can bring your son to the shul. You could be the member of the local government and at the same time organize chuppah for your children and circumcise your son. No problem with that. It was separate world. And so Georgian Jews preserved religion tradition much better than Soviet Jews in general. 1958, Khrushchev started heavy anti-religious campaign that lasted for about 6 years. During that campaign, the temples, the Christian churches, the mosques, and the synagogues all over the country were closed in great numbers. Like if in 1953, by the time of the Stalin's death, we have 450 synagogues in all of Soviet Union. By the late 1960s, we have less than 100. It's time when the government prohibited to bake matzah in state bakeries, when they made circumcision a crime. And so, and when they kept arresting the underground religious leaders, look at this photographs, you have religious Jews and you have the Soviet police interfering, checking the documents, checking what you're doing here. It was very, very heavy, vulgar anti-religious campaign that concerned every religion, including Judaism. It's also time when so many anti-religious books were published. See, when it concerns Judaism, any anti-religious book becomes anti-Semitic book. In its essence, it's very clear. Look at this book. It's called Judaism Without Embellishment, without beautification. This edition is in Ukrainian, but it was also published in other languages. See, it represents Jews in the nastiest, ugliest, most terrible way one can imagine. It's like because there is no border between anti-religious book and anti-Semitic book. It comes together. But see, these books, they also kind of brought more oil into that flame of the anti-Semitism. Jews are not only bad people, not only terrible doctors who want to kill the members of the government, but also the religion is evil. It's like the reminder of the medieval practices to call Judaism the evil religion. So what you have on the screen, this is the Soviet passport. The front page of the Soviet passport, you have a photograph, you have the date of birth, you have the place of birth, And then you have ethnicity here. This is Yevrey, which means Jew. It's line number 5. So in Soviet Union, post Second World War, the word Jew became inappropriate word. You wouldn't say it out loud. You wouldn't open your mouth and say, I am a Jew. You'd get all red and you would want to hide somewhere. Instead, people used line number 5. Because of the line number 5, we can't accept you into the university. Because of the line number 5, no, you can't get this job. Um, and so at the same times, Soviet Jews, the phenomenon of the late Soviet Jew, it's very often Russian intelligence, a person who is very well educated, who is successful, maybe in medicine, in science, in music, in literature, who has beautiful, wonderful library at home, who reads a lot, who knows a lot, his broad knowledge. But that's line number 5. Like my mom, she was born to a highly assimilated family. The only thing she knew, she had this passport that said Jew. The only thing she knew about it was that she had to study much harder than her friends to get to the university she wanted. That's it. There was no other meaning of this word. It didn't tell her anything about her history or identity or her ancestors. No, just a poor little thing that prevents you from getting what you want to, what you deserve. At the same time, we see that the percentage of Jewish members of Communist Party was constantly growing. Like every fifth Jew of Soviet Union was a member of a Communist Party. Why is that? Because in Soviet system, party membership, it was always a ticket to better life, a ticket to better university, ticket to better job, ticket to be able to buy food in better stores. You want to make career, you become member of the Communist Party. Do you really believe in communism? I cannot tell this, but it's what you do out of your belief or out of necessity. Jews, because Jews were banned from political and diplomatic careers and military careers, so Jews flooded so-called phys math schools with emphasis on physics and mathematics, English schools, the schools where more hours were given to English or to another foreign language. Jews occupied certain professions specifically. Construction, there were so many Jewish engineers and architects. Music, Jewish composers. Literature, Jewish writers and poets. Science, Jewish scholars. So many school teachers, especially in foreign languages, biology, chemistry, math, physics, doctors of all different professions, lawyers, but lawyers are only defenders, not prosecutors. But Jews were very much involved in professions related to the economy, like the director of the grocery or department store. As soon as computer related professions came to the market, Jews were already there. There were many Jewish actors and singers. They were well known and famous all around Soviet Union. If we look at the Jewish employment, we see from like 1930s to 1970s that especially architects and engineers, it was that kind of a sector of the economy where it was easier for Jews to get to the university, easier to get a job. So it was constantly growing. Teaching was another available profession because it was not very well paid, but it was respectful. Uh, Medicine and pharmacy is pretty stable. Culture and arts, finances, law, these were the areas where you find majority of Jews. And if Jew was an engineer, he was not just engineer. He was always the top engineer of the factory or top engineer of some scientific institution. Jews were not able to become part of party elite, but they became part of non-party elite. Like you can become like the main, like a doctor. You could be the head of the hospital, or let's say the eyes, like ophthalmologist, the best ophthalmologist of the region. And it meant a very good life because in Soviet Union, because of the constant shortage of everything, a lot was based on bribes. So let's say if you are a really good doctor, yes, your salary is very little, but the party members, the elite party members who want to be treated by good doctor, they come to you and they pay you hand to hand. They bring you nice food. They bring you expensive alcohol. They help you buy a car. They help you move into nice apartment. So many Jews actually lived economically very, very well, and in average, better than any other ethnic group in Soviet Union. Like what is non-party? Like my grandfather, one of my two grandfathers, he was the head of the taxi company, the only one taxi company in Leningrad. He had everything a Soviet person could have imagined of. I mean, he had black caviar, just, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He had a car with personal driver, big apartment, summer house. He had everything because so many people needed taxis, and he kept, helping some influential people with the cars and stuff. So there were other ways to live nicely and very, very comfortable in Soviet Union. Jews were also very much involved in so-called parallel or gray, or you can say black economy. In Soviet Union, the economy was ruled by the state, so there was constant shortage of everything. The Soviet economy was all oriented on military production and the airspace technologies, but they could not produce, I don't know, kettles, stockings, suits, furniture, all of it was a problem. There was constant shortage of absolutely everything. In Soviet Union, there was something called artel. It was state-sanctioned collective of workers, like a small manufacturing firm, which was organized like in a private way, but had to be approved by the state. And they were small, so they produced all different types of consumer goods. So many Jews, especially from the former Pale of Settlement, from the smaller towns. There was like a network of the small towns, for example, around Moscow, where so many Jews lived, and they organized those artels. So many of those artels during the day produced what they were required to produce by the state, but at night produced something extra. And then they were able to sell that extra on the black market. Such people were called tsechoviki, kind of a shadow entrepreneurs. Um, in Because a tsech, it's the workshop in a factory. Um, According to the Soviet system, to do it was a crime. You're criminal. You can make millions of rubles selling, like coats or shoes or whatever that you produce under kind of at night. But it's very difficult to spend your money because you can never explain where you get it. You have to bribe everyone around you, the local police, the local government, so that they don't punish you. And there were quite a few Jewish millionaires, the heads of such gray production. Now, in 1960s, Khrushchev started that anti-artel campaign. He introduced death penalty for economic crimes. He said whoever produces anything, at night, sells it in illegal way, um, is a theft of the state property. In 1961, the death penalty was introduced, and they organized many open trials in the grand halls, in the concert halls, opened for general public. They attracted thousands of viewers, and like 90% of the people put on trial were Jews, because Jews were so heavily involved in that parallel economy. Jews received terrible sentences, and if there were Jews and non-Jews, Jews received worse sentences than non-Jews. And this, we have new anti-Semitic campaign organized in the press. It was this new economic anti-Semitism. Now, Jews are stealing the state property. Parallel to it, we still have the problem with the memory of Holocaust. In Soviet Union, no Holocaust, no such word, no official recognition of Holocaust. This is Babi Yar in Kiev, the place where over 100,000 Jews were murdered. In Soviet times, the government planned to build a new residential neighborhood. It didn't work. Uh, but the government did not let Jews put any memorial there. In 1961, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, he's non-Jewish. He visited Babi Yar. He was a poet. He was a young poet. He was told the story of Jews, and he published the lyrics called Babi Yar. It says, no monument stands over Babi Yar, a drop sheer as a crude gravestone. I am afraid. Today I am as old in years as all the Jewish people. Now I seem to be a Jew. Here I plod through ancient Egypt. Here I perish crucified on the cross. And to this day I bear the scars of nails. I seem to be Dreyfus. The Philistine is both informer and a judge. I'm behind bars, beset on every side, hunted, spat on, slandered. It was like a bomb. It was a shock. It was a shock that someone was able to open his mouth and publicly say a word Jew and publicly admit that there was something terrible that had happened to Jews. And it inspired Jews a lot, a lot. And so this is the spot of Babi Yar. And so Jews of Kiev started coming to this place every year on that very day in September, just to be there, not to protest. It's not political protest. It's not an action. Just be there and talk and just say, my mom's here. I lost my parents here. I lost my grandparents. It turned out into the whole movement, not political, not with big slogans. No, just Jews coming, bringing their children, talking to each other, seeing each other. And step by step, it was attended by the writers, by the poets. So, and because Soviet government kept trying to prohibit it, not to let people in. So it turned into the political movement, into kind of an anti-governmental action by it was rather organized. Its anti-governmental essence was actually organized by the state rather than by Jews. And so Babi Yar became this very important place of Jews reclaiming their self-identity, reclaiming their memory. And then slowly, Jews started bringing Jewish symbols, even the Star of David. Look at this KGB report. After the active intervention of members of the public and police officers, the candles were extinguished and the six-pointed star was removed from the Babi Yar area. So it was this quiet kind of a war in Kiev, Jews and KGB against each other, Jews fighting for their memory. Six-Day War 1967, Soviet Union broke diplomatic relations with Israel. Soviet mass media were filled with these terrible caricatures presenting Israel as the fascist genocidal state. At the same times, Soviet Jews were inspired that Israel managed to win over Arabs operating Soviet guns and arms, like unbeatable Soviet guns, were defeated by Israelis. This is Kiev. It's the square in Kiev. In Soviet times, in 52, it was renamed as Victory Square. Historically, it was a Jewish bazaar, Jewish market square. So after Six-Day War, local Jews would say, Jews knew all along that they would beat the Arabs. So they went ahead and renamed the Jewish bazaar, Jewish market, to Victory Square 15 years in advance. There were many other kind of jokes about it that is Soviet Jews were proud of Israel to win this war. So what we see here, if in 1920s and 30s we had great success and high integration, in 1960s, 70s, and 80s, it changed into the glass ceiling, the exclusion of Jews from public space, from all the governmental positions. The streets that were originally named after Jews were renamed so that, the Soviet people were not to see Jews on the TV except for some singers and actors, and the state anti-Semitism. No wonder the Jews started feeling strangers, unwanted in the Soviet reality. And so 1969, 18 highly positioned, well-to-do Georgian Jews, they wrote a letter to the UN, to the Human Rights Committee. They sent this letter through the Embassy of Netherlands, and then they sent the second letter after 3 months, saying, we declare once again that we will never give up the right to live in the land of Israel, because we are an integral part of Jewish people who have preserved their faith and traditions. May our prayers penetrate your mind and your conscience, Mr. Secretary General. We're waiting for your help because time is in a hurry. We're not afraid of anything because, living or dead, we are the children of Israel. So 1969, we can say this is the beginning of the fight for Exodus. And it started with Georgian Jews. This is the group of Georgian Jews who specifically came to Moscow to organize 3-day strike at the Central Telegraph Building in Moscow. This was the beginning of that giant movement that you know as the Refusenik movement. That is still not history because the members of this movement is still around us, still can share their stories. Why is this Refusenik movement? The thing is that to leave Soviet Union, you had to receive special exit visa. Even if you wanted to go on a tourist trip on vacation, you had to go to the local police and apply for exit visa. This is what you have on your screen. As soon as you applied to leave USSR permanently, you lost your job, your spouse lost her or his job, your children got kicked out of the university, and if you were refused to receive this visa, you found yourself in this terrible situation. You have no job, no income, and no exit visa. You have to apply again, again, and again, and you never know how long you will have to wait. So this is the essence of the word refusing, the one who applied but was refused. Now he is in this strange position, fly, like hanging in the air. This issue of Refuseniks became the whole issue about Jews became part of the global politics that I would not want to go deep into, but you know that the Jewish issue was part of the international politics. There is this famous Jackson-Vanik Amendment of 1974 when the US restricted trade with the USSR unless they allowed the free immigration. They were Western intellectuals, even European communists, supporting the idea that you have to have a free right to exit the States. The Your American movement let my people go. The state of Israel, who was very active on this scene as well, encouraging, trying to negotiate with Soviet government, seeing what was available, what ways were available to take Jews from Soviet Union. So in 1970s and 80s, Jews were this diplomatic currency, and every year, the number of Jews that received those exit visas was different depending on the international climate. I remind you that nobody else had this chance to leave Soviet Union. So in Soviet Union, there was this joke that the Jewish husband, it was not a luxury, but a matter of transportation. Because you have a Jewish spouse, you can leave Soviet Union. Another very important step in that movement would be the Leningrad trial, the Jews who decided to hijack the small airplane and take it to Sweden. They wanted to organize press conference there to speak about the situation that Jews have this glass ceiling and at the same time are not able to leave. There's this wonderful movie, Operation Wedding, that you can watch to learn more about this case. This movement for exit from the USSR, you can say it consisted of three major parts. The core activists, the leadership, no more than 10,000 Jews for all the country, the ones who would organize the demonstrations, who would run the underground Hebrew schools, communicate with foreign press, and they were under constant KGB surveillance. Very often, these Jews were arrested and sentenced to many, many years in prison. There was so-called cultural underground, and about 100,000 Jews participated in it. There would be people who would attend secret Hebrew classes. I remind you that teaching or learning Hebrew in Soviet Union was a crime, was prohibited by law. Those who would distribute some of the illegal literature, gather at the synagogues for the holidays, and immigration applicants. Between 1968 and 98, there were about a bit less than 300,000 Jews and their family members who successfully immigrated from the USSR. But there were many more of those who applied but did not get this exit visa. This is the public protest in Leningrad. It says, "We want the right to exit. Let us go home. We demand going to our family, reuniting with our families in Israel." You know these names of the activists, the prisoners of Zion. The most famous would be Natan Sharansky, who is with us, who can tell his story, who was sentenced to 13 years of forced labor. It's his beautiful wife, wonderful wife, who fought for his release. It's Ida Noodle, to her memory this series is devoted to. She organized a great support network for imprisoned activists. One day she hung a banner from her balcony in Moscow, KGB, give me my visa. She was sentenced to 4 years of exile in Siberian village. Joseph Begun, his crime was teaching Hebrew. He was sentenced 3 times. He spent totally 10 years in Soviet prisons. These are people who who paid a terrible price for pressuring Soviet government to help Jews, their families, their friends. Every Jew leave Soviet Union and find his whole way around the world. Jewish cultural underground included Hebrew classes, the self-publishing of Hebrew calendars, of Jewish texts, festival of Jewish songs near Moscow, the movement of Baalei Tshuva. The members of this cultural underground, if you talk to them today, most of them would tell you this was the best time in their lives. It was the feel of unity, like we're all together. I remember myself being in the synagogue in 1989, celebrating Simchat Torah. It's the feeling that I never got again. The feeling that you are among your people. It's different from anything else I experienced in my life. I was there in this crowd, listening to the Jewish songs, dancing. It was like a fresh air. The underground cultural movement would organize weddings and Purim spills for kids of the Refuseniks. It was a very big and very interesting movement, and the members of it, they're still with us. We can still talk to them, still learn from them. And in this respect, since as Yom HaShoah, the memory of Holocaust also united Soviet Jews. That they this is in Leningrad, they would come together to the Jewish cemetery to pay respect to those who perished, to speak about the Jews who perished during the Holocaust. The life in refusal, aside of that cultural events, it was some families were waiting for like 10 years. Slipak family waited for 17 years to get the visa. They were scientific seminars. There was very active cultural life going on in refusal. Because see, these scholars, they were banned from their profession, but they wanted to keep working. So they organized their own underground kind of universities and study groups. Of course, the leaders of this movement was Vladimir and Maria Slipak. Imagine you have to wait for 17 years to leave the this it's it was just these are just amazing, incredible people. Alexandra Lerner, 16 years in refusal, a pioneer in cybernetics, incredible scholar. Because of him, so many Western scientists boycotted Soviet scientific conferences just because it was impossible to lock this person, not let him participate in the international events. And so, May 20th of May 1991, the exit visas were cancelled by law, and a big exodus began. And 3 months later, in August 1991, Soviet Union fell apart. And so the history of the Soviet Jewry came to the end. And after that, we have the history of Russian Jews already abroad in the United States and Canada and Australia and Israel. And we have the history and present day life of Russian Jews who are still in Russia. But in 1991, the history of Soviet Jewry finally ended up and together with the end of Soviet Union. So thank you very, very much. And I'm here for your questions.
Okay, that was fascinating. I feel like one of the major takeaways is just the contradictions of the Soviet Union. If you are raising your hand, please put your question in the chat. Okay. So, for instance, if the Soviet government hated Jews and Jews wanted to leave, why would they stop them from leaving?
Mm. This question, thank you very much. This question has many layers to answer. Um, it involves several aspects. One aspect is that for the Soviet leaders, it was absolutely impossible to believe that somebody wanted to leave. They just couldn't believe it. They thought it was just all mistake. That these people they changed their mind because you can't want to leave Soviet Union. It's impossible. Second thing, Soviet Union had very close relations with Muslim world, with Arabs, with Arab countries, and we see constant pressure from the Arab countries not to let Soviet Jews come to Israel. Because Soviet Jews were to bring technology. They were engineers, they were educated people. They were not poor Jews. No, no, no. They were Jews with knowledge, with technology. So Arab countries never wanted them in Israel. The third thing, Soviet government felt betrayed. Like, we give you everything. You're so well to do. I mean, you have your education. You're leading scholars. Why would you want to leave? We need your brains here. Why would we want to let your brains, sleep and go abroad? So it was this complex issue.
Okay, so you talked about the repatriation to Poland starting in 1944.
Mhm.
So people are still being murdered in Poland. So why would a Jewish person choose to go back to Poland and why would they stay?
Maybe I didn't make it right. 1944, Soviet government made this agreement with the Polish communist kind of underground government, and then they enforced this. So, for example, they were formerly Polish citizens who were able to go to Poland and join the army there, fighting against the Nazis, for instance. And the mass deportation took place after the war, mainly in 1946.
Okay, still hard to believe like what you were going back to. Okay, so it seems like the Soviet government didn't just tolerate Yiddish culture, they actually allowed it to thrive. So I'm wondering why would they have allowed this to flourish?
In Soviet Union, there was a conception that every ethnic group has a right to have its own culture in its own language, which had to be Soviet in its essence.
Mm,
So when we speak about Jews, Yiddish, it's this people's language. It's not connected to the religion. So they decided that it was okay to sing Soviet songs and it was okay to write Soviet communist articles and translate some of the books. So they did not see any problem. Yiddish was not seen as anti-Soviet thing. Hebrew, it's another way. Hebrew was prohibited on every level, teaching, learning, whatsoever.
okay, so we have a few more questions coming in. What impact did American demonstrations and pushback to free Soviet Jewry in the early 70s have on the Soviet government?
I believe it had a very, very strong impact, very strong. It was constant international pressure. So it had an impact on American government, and an American government would press Soviet government like that amendment of Jackson Vanik. So putting Soviet government into a very uncomfortable position. Sometimes it helped more Jews to receive exit visas. So I see that movement as incredibly helpful, very positive and impactful. Yes. Aside of the
Okay.
fact that they were American Jews who
Mhm.
managed to come to Soviet Union, bringing uh, lots of different goods to Soviet Jews.
Mm. So I feel like some of what you said about Jews sort of being pretty well off in this time kind of contradicts what we learned in the United States about the Soviet Union. So some of the questions that came in were about that, about when that might have shifted so that people wanted to leave. And also, we had a question about doctors specifically. Were they primarily women And were they considered less prestigious than, today we would consider a doctor or a lawyer to be sort of an elite profession?
Uh-huh. Thank you. So it depends. In Soviet Union, let's say just a physician in a local clinic, it was pretty low paid job. It wasn't
Mm.
anything fancy at all. Like physician or a teacher, it was pretty low paid job. It was intellectual, so so many Jews did it, men and women like pharmacists, but it couldn't bring you money or prestige. But if you become if you do surgeries, if you, you can be a psychiatrist, you can be a gynecologist. If once you do it on a kind of higher level, then it's prestigious. Then it brings you money, apartments, and better life. And many Jewish women were doctors. That's true.
Okay, two more questions. What do Americans get wrong about Soviet Jewry?
You tell me. How do I know? How do I know what you get wrong about Soviet Jewry? Maybe, okay. I think one myth is that Jews were very poor, very
Yes.
unhappy, the most persecuted group in Soviet Union. I tried to show you that this is a myth.
Hmm.
Jews were compared to the other ethnic groups, average, statistically, the most educated, the most professional group in Soviet Union. Jews had incredible success. But Jews wanted more. This is the problem. It's like if I promise my daughter to take her to Disneyland, but then tomorrow I tell her, you know what, I changed my plan and we're going to our, playground near our house. Can you imagine? She's 11. Imagine her reaction. She'll be very disappointed. She will say, I expected Disneyland. I mean, what are you talking about, Mom? Come on. The same thing. Soviet Jews got this great, incredible success, amazing success in 20s and 30s. And after that, the difference between what they had and what happened after the war with those anti-Semitic campaigns, with the elimination of the Holocaust memory, with glass ceiling, it was great disappointment. It's like Jews were in love, but then got terribly disappointed. It's like you promised your bride a castle, but take her to I don't know, little room. That's
Hmm.
it. This is and then it created this myth of Soviet Jews, being those poor people constantly persecuted. No, not at all. It's not true. Absolutely. So this I think is probably the major myth of Soviet Jewry.
The last question is how has life changed in Russia and how has life changed in the other countries that were part of the Soviet Union since 1991?
Wow, you ask big questions.
It's a
What is
big topic.
talk to Arya. Tell him I can do let's do another, four-part series, post-Soviet, post-socialist life of Eastern Bloc, Jews in the post-Soviet. It's a big question. Let's do it separate. The life changed dramatically, absolutely, because the restrictions that existed in Soviet Union and other socialist countries of Soviet bloc were eliminated. So the life changed absolutely dramatically. Thank you very much and happy Purim. Happy
Happy
Purim.
Purim.
See you. See you again very soon. Bye.